certainly in community colleges and in my role now, is how do we create that opportunity for everyone? Whether you're 18 or whether you're a working adult learner who has a family who needs to gain access to skills. I think that's been the biggest change. And, because of that change, you have organizations like Maven, Udemy, others who have also been trying to get into that space. I think, in my view, that space has to include both the public and the private sector. It can't be exclusive to one or the other. In the public sector, we need innovation to further personalize education for every Californian or every American. Likewise, I think the private sector has to realize that it is the public sector that will have the scale going forward in perpetuity, and we need to make sure that we access that.
I'm going to ask you for a follow-up on now that you're in your role at the California College Futures Foundation. What are your ambitions there? What are you hoping to do?
Well, College Futures Foundation is a private foundation focused on California, but that focus on California, we want to make sure and leverage to change the narrative at the national level as well, because of the fabulous innovation that's happening around higher education in California. And yes, there is innovation in California in higher education relative to other parts of the country. But what we want to do is expand our thinking about social and economic mobility, what that means, because it is, when we first started with the foundation, we were focused on the BA being the greatest lever for economic and social mobility. We want to expand that thinking. There are other ways. I think BA attainment is limiting to a certain extent, and BA attainment, the whole notion of BA attainment is changing as we start to break apart within that BA and think about what parts of a BA are leading to social and economic mobility. So that's, we want to lean into that narrative in California and begin to change the thinking.
The another thing that if you're not in the higher education wonk space, this might be news to you, which is from 1944, the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, otherwise known as the GI Bill, until 2016, the narrative of social mobility in the United States was college access. That is how left, center, and right sort of imagined social mobility, and funding that mobility, funding college primarily through through government or philanthropic capital and your own bank account, right? Was how that happened. The presidential elections of 2016 really shook that storyline, because those who had been telling that story recognized that a substantial number of Americans without college degrees were furious, right? That attaining a four-year, quite expensive college degree was a sort of baseline credential for reasonable economic security. And so that has substantially changed the conversation about how educators thinking about how opportunity and mobility through education should happen, right? College isn't going to go away. Americans love it too much, and it's too effective at changing lives and enhancing them. But it's not enough anymore. And these gentlemen, represent, and many you'll hear today, are actively thinking about what that narrative of educational opportunity should look like going forward. So back to you guys, what I find so remarkable about California is that California was a leader in what we now call human capital development in the 20th century with the Master Plan for Higher Education, which was really another spectacular civic accomplishment. In the 21st century, this region is an unquestioned leader in new forms of educational ventures, right? New ways of providing educational opportunities. So here in California, right, we have a strong legacy of public provision and a strong legacy of new forms of venture provision. And so I'm going to go back to you, and I'll ask Gagan if he'd like to start. Like, how should we, as either as educators or entrepreneurs or as citizens, how do you think we should be thinking about the different roles of the public and private sectors in this conversation about lifelong learning?
Well, I'll start with the public, which is that I think that the public sector is going to continue to fund the vast majority of this, and for at least, and I would say it's bridging the gap is the way I think of it, because I think it's inevitable that we will have an unbundling of the higher ed system over the next 10 to 50 years. I think a lot of people thought it was going to happen over COVID. Like that was not going to happen. But like 10 to 50 years, it's going to happen, right? The system is just.
And what do you mean by that? What?
I don't think that it will be obvious to children who are going to high school who are of means, let's say. So, you know, go to good public schools, quote unquote, that they should go to college. I think that there will be a sort of crest of college attendance amongst the middle class in America, and that will start to decline. So that's what I mean, essentially. And it'll decline for a bunch of reasons. But then as that declines, then you will see a subsequent crest at the lower income bracket. So sorry, it would come after, essentially. So because fortunately or unfortunately, the systems that are the social structures that decide what you should do are lagging to a different income bracket. And so as sort of wealthier or middle class people decide en masse, because they have the option to forego college and to go straight into the workforce or do alternative means, then eventually it will become socially accepted. And I think that will be a huge boon to lower class individuals who currently believe that is the best option for them, and then decide, oh, wait a second, I can sort of end around this system and get in where the middle class folks are going. And I think that will turn into
Why
that's
do you
how I think it'll
anticipate
happen.
that exit from because boy, they're lining up around the block to buy what we're selling here and at Berkeley. So
Yeah,
what do you
I think
see
that's
going to be the
Well, I mean, from my point of view, I mean, you still see pent-up demand at places like Stanford, Berkeley. I mean, look at UCLA. UCLA's got 140,000 plus applications, more than they've ever had in their entire existence. But behind that, what you see is huge enrollment declines in community colleges across America. Enrollment declines out of most private, independent universities, liberal arts universities. Enrollment declines at regional four-year universities. So it's just a matter of time before it catches up. I mean, the privilege that a Stanford has is you've rejected so many students.
Right.
You know, there's so much demand. But
right. Yeah, no, and I think that just the increasing sophistication of college alternatives. There are just more and more of them, right?
Well, and we're
getting better at them.
You offer something that, you know, what you're selling is a network, access to a network. And as others get more sophisticated at how to tap into networks, that will be less and less of a selling point for Stanford, Berkeley, Harvard.
Did I let you finish, Gagan?
Yeah, I feel good.
Okay. Eloy, what do we do in this new world of multiple provision and multiple business models for what used to be called college, right? And now might be college right?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, a lot of that change has already happened. And I think, as Gagan pointed out, the pandemic accelerated that change. You know, there was enrollment decline before the pandemic accelerated enrollment decline. Part of that enrollment decline is a lack of faith in the higher education system anymore. The cost, access, the length of time to degree, and now the availability of flexible learning environments. So even in the K-12 space, you saw a huge increase in the number of homeschool options that opened up, and those will continue to grow. So I think it's the personalization and the customization of learning that will take off. Some colleges, both public and private, have begun to adapt to that. You know, in California, we built a fully online competency-based college called Calbright College, and thinking that we would need it someday. Well, here we are, and yes, we needed it, much to the disagreement of many lawmakers in California, but that's a whole nother
Right.
But that's what's going to happen in my view. There's going to be a constant customization, personalization. I mean, think about it now. I could turn on YouTube right now and learn a whole set of skills. I can go to Skillshare. I can go to any of a number of skill providers, some good, some great, some not so good. But that's just going to continue to march forward. And there's going to be more and more congruence or meeting in the middle between public, private institutions, for-profit options. Publishers are getting into this space.
Yeah.
Every publisher has some skills option. It's just going to be a growing cacophony of skills-based learning, and we'll see where it all shakes out.
We'll see where it all shakes out. You're going to let us all off the hook for that. Okay.
Well, there's a lot of money pouring in, and what we know is that some of that money will turn into something real, and most of it won't.
And I'll just say, you know, as a citizen, I worry that the risk, who's going to bear the risk of that? And I know you worry about that too, right? I mean, innovation's great unless you bought the product that failed, right?
But
so
this is
go ahead.
This is one of those situations where the opposite is more likely. It is more likely that where there is low risk, people will pay the general population will pay for it. They already have. I would argue that college has been failing for about 15 to 20 years. However, we are realizing it now because, of course, it's a lagging indicator. You have to wait until the data, and you know, you guys all focus on macro data. I mean, my job is to look at micro data, right? So, like, I look at 10 students, and I'm like, okay, that's a trend. And most people will wait. It takes 10 or 20 years for there to be a million students or 10 million students. So in the case of higher education especially, and I would argue the same thing is true for K-12, though I know a lot less about it. In higher education especially, the people who are bearing the brunt of it are the people who are going to college, because most people who are going to college are getting scammed.
There's that $1.7 trillion in student.
Correct. And that's bared by taxpayers. So that's the secondary outcome. And so, I mean, what, venture capitalists lose a couple $1 million or 50 or 100 or $250 million on something? I'm sure everyone's going to be up in arms about the $250 million and not put it into context, right? But, you know.
Well, and I would say also, and you know, say what one will about massively open online courses, they never bankrupted anybody, right? They were free. I agree with you on that. That you know, there's there's a lot of innovation, and community colleges, I would say, are in a similar regard. The risk of attending a community college is almost zero in terms of the risk of loss to someone attending them. So I'm gonna just raise a hypothetical, and then I want to spend the last few minutes getting comments and questions from the floor. So in lieu of following our script here, but I do want to say also that to all of you in the room, and especially to those at the dais, schools like Stanford and Harvard and the perhaps 50 other universities in the nation that would be perfectly capable of running without any public subsidy going forward, do have a sense that they are being called upon to make more contributions to more people at more price points and to be positive players in the progression of this sector. You know, and I won't ask you to answer this now because I want to get more people in the room. But or if you have some, of course I can't ask you a question. I'll let you answer. But you know, what can Stanford do? Like, what can this Lamborghini that we're sitting in, you know, do to sort of help the nation and the sector responsibly move into its future?
Build a bigger car and let more people in.
How do we do that? More residential, more dorms, more 4 years, more.
I am not a huge proponent of perpetuating the residential college and university model. It's a very expensive model. It is bankrupted a lot of colleges and universities right now. And quite frankly, there are a handful of students who want that experience, who want to go to the football game, basketball game, and interact. But the majority of students, the majority of learners are working, many working parents. They want access to the learning that you can provide. So whether that's opening up, more partnerships to offer more online courses, whatever that may be, I think the more that you can open the doors to a university like Stanford and walk the walk, the more that others will follow, because whether you like it or not, you set an example for other college and universities. They want to follow in those footsteps because they see the big endowment. So I think that would be a great example. I mean, look, even if you doubled your size, you're still not going to crack the problem,
right?
But you will show an example to others who are following in the Stanford footsteps.
Stanford, Harvard, et cetera, have a disproportionate vote when it comes to how credentialing happens in the first place. The number one thing you can do is just get rid of it. I mean, and redo it. I mean, very simply, it should not, like schools that are doing.
Get rid of our flagship product?
I don't think that Stanford or Harvard would have much of a problem if it was dismantled, but I think it would dramatically accelerate the competition between public and private that is necessary to encourage the public sector on higher ed to innovate and the private sector to be able to be a player. Because the biggest challenge right now is, if you try to start a school right now as a private individual, you get sued for not having a mailbox, as an example, because you're a digital school. You get sued for not following a bunch of extremely backwards, rigid rules. It's like the rule book is like, I mean, I've heard it's thousands of pages. Like there's an actual rule book, and I've heard it's thousands of pages of things you need to do to meet certification requirements as a university. And the question I would ask is, look at certified universities and look at the non-certified options and tell me honestly that there is a discernible difference between the two in terms of outcomes. And if it's not, then I say Stanford should, if Stanford wants to do the best it can by the vast majority of students in the world, all it needs to do is make a couple of phone calls.
I have a fantasy of Vice President Biden calling Mark Tessier-Levine and saying, "Hey, what might you do for the nation in the next 5 years?" Wonder what he might say. Let's see if we won't have time to have question and answer, but I'd love to have some more voices in the room. So if you would, please raise your hand boldly and say, I have a question or a comment. It can just kind of seed the discussion going forward. Yes.
Question about what's happening with vocational education and partnerships between employers and community colleges and creating pipeline.
Say your name.
Jamie Wolf.
From?
Pixar Animation.
Thanks for coming. I'm not going to let them answer, but we want to have that question. Other comments or questions? Yes, please.
Hi, the online audience has a few questions for you.
Please, great.
So one is, what skills do you think companies need in this decade that education does or maybe doesn't fulfill? And where are folks getting other skills outside of the college setting?
What are some other ones?
Some other ones. We're wondering if you can address the integration of identity, emotional, and interpersonal development in the future of higher education.
Wow.
And we're wondering what's going on for lifelong learning for folks over 50.
Wow. Okay. So again, I'm not going to let us answer those questions because we're going to have a whole day of dialogue. I just wanted to sort of get a sample of the kinds of issues that are surfacing. And I'm going to even end on time, if you can believe it, you guys. Thank you, Gagan and Eloy, for this very stimulating conversation, and I look forward to more.